Welcome, viewers. Welcome back to our programs. With me today, I have a rather unusual guest. Let me start with a small story. Almost 30 years back, when we were working in one of Goa's smaller newspapers, we used to have a lot of new people joining and leaving us. And one fine day, we had this youngster coming all the way from England who happened to be a Goan expat, and he told us that he wanted to try out a job at the Herald, and he actually stayed on. He joined and stayed on for 6 months to a year, and today this young man is with us, and his name is Daryl Pereira. Daryl, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Great to be here with
Yeah,
you.
so Daryl was my colleague there, and the reason why I dragged him here when I realized that he was passing through Goa is simply this. Daryl is the director of content for IBM, okay, the big IT giant in Silicon Valley. Apart from that, he was also the managing editor till recently of IBM Developer, which is a technical journal brought out there. He brings to us a wealth of experience from all over the world. We are very proud of you, Daryl. Tell us where your journey took you from those days in Herald.
Do you want to hear my side of the story from where you gave your side of the story?
Sure. Tell us your side of the Herald story.
Yeah. So how I came to the Herald was I was a young guy. I studied in the UK. I started work. I had a management trainee job. My parents were very proud of me, thought this is great. I was not that happy in that job. And I found that, and around this time, I've always, and I still do have a love of, I like electronic music. And at the time I was into, there was a party scene going on that was developing in Goa. And it was getting some publicity in the West. I found myself sitting at this company that I was working for, doing kind of accounting type work. I remember one day just looking at the clock, 3:00, it was 5 to 3. I felt myself sitting there going, what am I doing? I look up again, I was like, it's 2 minutes to 3. It's still 2 minutes. It felt like the clock had stopped, and I was like, I cannot do this for another minute. I cannot. So I handed in my resignation. I said, you know what? I'm from Goa, even though I was born and raised in the UK. I'm going to go back. I'm going to go to Goa. I want a piece. I want to be a part of that music scene. So, bought a ticket. I guess I wasn't that big on planning in those days because I came to Goa end of April. And I thought, okay, let me go be a part of this party scene. I was staying with my family who were scratching their head wondering what exactly is he doing here? Why has he come? My parents were like, why did you give up this great job with training potential? What are you doing? For them, I told them I was going to go discover my heritage. I wanted to discover my roots.
That was the official version which you told us.
I think so.
Okay.
Meanwhile, I'm walking down the beaches of Banali. I'm walking down the beaches of Kalva. And I know they're different now. In those days, the shacks were there, right? And they were fully shacks. And I was talking to these guys saying, hey, I've come from the UK, but I'm Goa. You know, I sit in this middle ground. I could do a great job here for you. And they're like, sounds great. One problem, the rains are coming in 3 weeks. And we're about to break down these places. If you come back in 7 months, let's talk. So I thought, okay, this is great. So I went back. I remember sitting in my aunt and uncle's house, thinking I've got enough money for 4 months. This isn't going to get me through. I could go back home to England and say to my parents, I'm sorry, I messed up. Can I live at home while I get myself sorted? I said, you know what? Let me just see what jobs are available. And through that route, I just saw there was just a small ad in the Herald saying English writer required. I was like, you know what? I may as well try for this. I used to write a little bit for college. I enjoyed it. Let me give that a go. I didn't know where the job was. It just said, because it was the Herald and it said to go to the Herald office, I thought maybe they're doing the interview there for somewhere else. I didn't really know what the job was. I come to the office. I remember I talked to yourself. I talked to a few other folks there. And it took me a while to realize, oh, the job's actually for the newspaper, isn't it? This is a job for the newspaper. And I was like, wow, that's exciting. And I do remember saying as well, like, I remember, you know, well, it's an interview, right? Why do you want the job? And what can you bring to the job? I guess I don't know. The thing that sprang to mind was, well, I am this English guy that now lives in Goa. I could do a good job of telling. I could give you my experiences of what it means to come from that side to this side, and what that brings. And so that's really where, and then I remember thinking, okay, I'll just try it and see what happens. I had no real perception. I remember you guys took me out for a coffee afterwards
and warning you about the pitfalls and the perils and the challenges of. But I mean, while in those days, journalism jobs at the start do look tough. But as you mentioned it to me in discussion, that was one of the pivotal points in shaping your.
It did have a big moment for me. So you gave me, you offered me the job. It was surprising because I didn't realize India works on 6-day weeks, and you said, okay, come in tomorrow. And I was like, and it was a Friday, I think it was, and I was like, oh, okay, that's Saturday, isn't it? And so I came in. But like you said, then over time, and it was a great experience for me working on it. It was the international edition of the Herald that went out every 2 weeks.
It was a small tabloid which went out to the diaspora and things like that. And of course, there were others in the team, like I think Goldwyn Figueira and Agnello Rodriguez and Susan
Fernandez came on board. I remember we hired her, and then. But it was great because it was, like you said, it's a small team, and the paper came out every 2 weeks.
So of course we won't go into this story because you've shared it with me quite often, and it's very detailed about the challenges of working in Goa, living on a local salary. And convincing people that you are serious about your job. We are all beginners at some stage, and you were a beginner then. But from there, you went back to Britain. You did your masters, and the last many years have taken you into technical writing. Would that be right?
That would be right. And just to say, I'd say there may be two things from that time to bring it up to the future, to where I am. Is that one is that it took me. From that time, learned some key skills like writing is obviously a key one, but also photography, design, and layout. After that, then I went back. I did a master's in media.
You did 2 masters?
One master's in media, but I did switch to make it multimedia.
Okay.
I switched the degree from being theoretical to being more practical, mainly because also around that time, mainly through I know organizations like GoAnet that you're still involved with. It was interesting to see working for print publications, then this fledgling internet, this group of librarians, computer scientists, that were being able to do the same thing at the time through these 96 baud modems and be able to, but the news that they were being able to share, we were waiting 2 weeks to get the news out, and the idea that they could be able to, without all the economics that we had to deal with, be able to put news out almost instantaneously. That idea felt like, wow, this is interesting. So for my master's, I concentrated on internet technologies, which even in the UK at that time, I had to really fight because nobody was interested in that. Everyone was about CD-ROMs. So from that time then, basically, then on the back of that, I realized that building websites, it felt the skills were very transferable. That you could use those same skills from the newspaper were very similar to building websites. And that's what effectively took me to the US. And then to roll on from that. From that time forward, I started working in what now has become really digital marketing.
I see.
But really coming at it from the degree of, and even now where it's content, it feels that there's so much overlap between this world and,
it's not, there are no big walls between all of them.
Right, although even before it felt like they were more siloed, but now it feels like they've come together.
Yeah, this full thing of technical writing, it's a field which not many have tapped into. What would be your take on it? Is it worth for young people to look at it seriously?
I think it is. I think there's definitely... what would I say? One is that, we see also through COVID, I know one thing that we see a lot in the West is that there's this digital transformation, which has been around for a long time, accelerated heavily during the COVID time. So that, either whether it's working from home for employees, whether it was shopping or e-commerce, but the growth in terms of digital, it feels like it's also fueling a new emerging technology interest. And it feels like that we're in a space where there's always been that need to be able to explain and express what is happening in that space, and to be able to make it understandable to as broad a group of people as possible. And so I think, I would suggest as well, I have some technical skills. I have done some development in my time, but also I work with a lot of people from many different backgrounds. If you don't have, if you can't program a computer, I don't think that that's the most important skill for this. It's really being curious and trying to figure out how you can make something relatable to an audience.
So your jobs have taken you into what fields exactly?
So in terms of what I was doing in terms of within IBM, so I've now worked for IBM for over a decade.
I see.
And in that time, originally I was working in a space called search engine optimization. I had some experience of that.
Yeah.
I worked for small agencies, and I got very interested when blogs and some of the online, especially the idea of digital sharing of information was growing. And so I remember even, for instance, setting up. I came into IBM through a small company. And with that organization, this was probably been about 2005, 2006. I was saying, let's put out a blog. It'd be a way for, as a company, we had a website. I was like, let's have this blog. It's a way of being able to converse, to make a link from the organization to our audience in a way that would be unique. And it's person to person. It doesn't have to be everything looks corporate and has a marketing feel. It took some convincing. They said yes. And so I found myself working more and more in that space, and with the emergence of social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, became increasingly interested in both blogs, but then also this broader social media space. And as you say, when I was working in the developer space, you could see that
the IBM developer is a network for its developers, which communicates to them. And
it is, and it started like in 2002 as a big online resource. IBM does have a history of working a lot with open source communities, of working a lot with technologies that weren't proprietary and not just IBM technologies. So the original
that were proprietary or
that were not. So that were external, so there was a lot of support. So a lot of the content that it was putting out early on, if you write about IBM products, you've got a certain amount of views. If you write about some of these bigger products around like HTML5, when we first started getting phones, and when you start working around some of the JavaScript frameworks and some of these things, you realize that there was a much bigger audience there. And to a degree, then it helped put IBM attached to some of these projects, which it was working with anyway. So one of the things we realized, for instance, working on platforms like Twitter, back in about 2010, we were able to build an account for Twitter that was bigger than the main IBM account for Twitter for developers.
I see.
Mainly by focusing on answering specific questions they had. A lot of it was around open source.
So it's not company focused, but it's developer focused.
Exactly. It's this idea that, and this is where I feel one of the bigger changes that I feel like I've seen through my career has been that companies have realized the more helpful you can be, the more you can answer questions, which may not be direct. It's different to saying, okay, I have this computer from you, it broke.
I have something to sell. I have something to sell. I have something to fix.
But how can you then talk about what's happening around that? If there's adjacent technologies, if there's other, you have partners and ways of working, the way in which you can talk about, a lot about thinking of kind of like a service mentality, not just for your products, but for the broader industry. Can you serve the industry? Then you can see that, especially through things like now, which gets called inbound traffic, it can become substantial by answering questions, and that way you build a level of trust with the audience.
Interesting. Daryl, I know that you have your links to Naveli, right? What was it like to resettle in Goa, facing culture shock where you come home, but the home is quite different from what you expect? Can you share some of those days and those times?
Yeah, sure. And I've got my links are around Margao, so both Navali and Banalia, where I've got family. And you're talking like back when I first came that time.
Right.
What struck me as most interesting, I think there were certain things there's obviously a lot that was very different in terms of trying to understand really. So I do not speak much Konkani was obviously one of the things.
We used to tease you and call you Englishman, Englishman,
Yeah.
because
Paklor, I think, would be something that used to be called. as
yeah,
well.
yeah.
And Shandawala was another
yeah,
thing I
yeah,
had
yeah.
for having long hair. And I think certain things, like for instance, seeing the fact that streets would have as many animals as they would have motor vehicles was this stuff. But for me as well, it was to see just the degree to which life happened on the streets. It's probably easier to say what I saw after you're right, I stayed for just over a year. I remember returning back, and the thing that struck me was the quiet.
In the UK?
In the UK, just standing on a street in the UK and just feeling like, wow, because I got
Where all the
used
people? Where all the
yeah, life will comes at you. It feels like and go, and after and sometimes if you're tired, it can feel a little bit oppressive and overwhelming. But on the whole, it was so energetic and just gave me so much.
And taking to work in Goa, was it easy? Was it tough? Was it challenging?
I think what were some of the harder things? So there were things that I had to learn, which, I'm sure yourself and many of your audience will probably roll their eyes. But even in terms of like how we non-verbally say yes and no. For instance, I remember when I the first piece that I wrote, and I showed it to the editor, showed it to Goldwyn, and said, here it is. And we had those computer screens. He sat there. He's reading the article. And I'd been agonizing over this thing. I'd written it out. I'd changed the words. I'd looked at it, changed the words some more, gave it to him. He sat there. He looked at it. He looked at me and went. And I just crumbled. I was like, oh no, he doesn't like it. He's not into this thing. He's not into it. And it took me a little while to realize, oh, that's actually that's a good sign. So there were certain things like that where it took me a while to figure out that, in terms of, even then to realize, am I doing a good job? Is this working well? So that was definitely one of the one piece about it. I think the other side I'd say would be, and I don't know if this is the case generally, most of my working experience has been with the Herald, but, there would be things like sometimes, the power's going to go out for 20 minutes.
It was particularly acute in those days.
Yeah.
In those days, it was much tougher, and, just struggling with the infrastructure was a major issue. We are talking about 93, 94.
Yes, yeah. And I know we had UPS systems and some of these things, but sometimes, you'd stop. But then it would be like, okay, come, we'll go sit in the cafe and we'll go, and I don't know, there was a level of
tolerance,
interaction, I would say, that it had with fellow workers, which is different, I would say, to what I've had what I've experienced in other places, just because, and some of it's just because it's that thing is that when if you're up against struggles and then it tends to get the bonding that can happen in those situations can be that much
so
stronger.
The newspaper used to be like a training school, as we used to jokingly say, and many of our guys have actually reached places different parts of the world, a lot in the Gulf, the odd person even in Singapore and China, Beijing and all that. What's your experience for someone who wants an international career in journalism? Is it tough? Can they make it? Should they try? Should they go at the right age? What's your tips?
Yeah, I think one tip I would say is that, as I say, I think the core skills to me remain the same. Like if you practice, think of it like a craft where you have to perfect your writing. Think of it like I still feel like I could be a much better writer than I am.
There's always scope for improvement.
There's always scope for improvement, be internally curious, but the writing, the visual arts and that side of it, and design, those elements which feel like they're consistent throughout. I've seen it, we've gone from print to mainly computers, now we've gone mainly to phones. All those things remain the same. You have to think about different form factors, and we talk a lot about mobile first. But, then it's still pretty much the same in terms of, from my experience, when I spent time with Twitter and working on trying to build a Twitter account, it reminded me of when, and it was yourself and Goldwyn were helping me learn about how to write headlines. There are skills like that.
Being brief.
Being brief, trying to be punchy, trying to be provocative. Some of these things feel that regardless of, you can start thinking, should I be on TikTok? Should I have a blog? Should I do this? Should I do that? I would say there is a fundamentals underneath all of those, regardless of which direction you go, which is important. The other side, I would say, it feels like there's a big influx of the kind of journalism skills, and I work with probably one of the bigger content marketing teams
In the
that
world,
out
in the
there
world.
in the world. We've got at least, there's about 40 or 50 people working specifically in content,
Wow.
and then you have people in events and other sides around it. But within that team, you can see that there's also, and this team really would not have existed if you go back to, say, year 2000. Companies didn't have teams like this. They didn't see the need. But those skills that are now are largely the same skills of journalism. If you're wondering, oh my God, should I go into journalism or communications? It looks like it's really difficult because the newspapers are not selling like they used to. Isn't it a tough environment? I'd say there have been it feels like there's been a lot more opportunities that have opened up in the corporate realm. Every company now starts thinking, once it has its website, once it has the basics down, starts thinking about how can I engage, and the tools and the mechanisms are now so much more available than they've ever been. So whether it is things like blogs or video work or whatever it may be, companies at the moment have a big appetite for that because they realize that they can stand out from their competitors just through content. And so that would be one suggestion, is especially, and that is a global, that's happening globally.
That's amazing. I mean, that's a very interesting insight that you're talking about, because the way people look at it, they talk as if media is old fashioned and it's not any relevant anymore. The form is changing, but
Yes.
the need will be there.
Yeah. No, definitely. I'll say even then, the people that, for instance, like I don't know, where I work, like, for instance, it feels like social media, some of these areas as well, they're just blossoming. And now you're getting to a point where a lot of times they were seen as tactical. So it would see, a company would say, okay, we've got a product, we need to get this product out to the world. We'll think about, we'll send emails, we'll reach out to we need to update the website. And then they would say, okay, let's make sure that our social team knows about putting this out there. And that bit's going to continue. But you're also seeing now a lot more where things like social media, for instance, can play more of a strategic role. In that same model, you've got a product, you put your information out there. Social media is one of the best channels to understand, what is the response on that. People love the factor A about your product, but they don't like factor B, or whatever you've got. So that you can feed that back into the business, and you can see now smarter businesses are starting to roll in and to be more strategic in terms of, you can use media becomes so much more important than just thinking this is a way for me to tell you about my business. It's a way for me to understand about my business,
Right.
the degree to which my business is predicated on you and on you liking it or what I've got.
Thanks a ton, Daryl, for all
Okay.
these words of insight. It was very interesting hearing from you. More than that, it's been a pleasure knowing you all these 30 plus years, and also realizing how deeply involved the Goan diaspora is with their own home in very different ways, even if it means keeping in touch, just across the years. Thanks so much. Thanks for spending your time
Thank
with
you.
me.
This was great. Great to talk to you. Thank you.